Hello again. This is Brian Graves, the Vice President of Marketing here at Conance. And again, welcome to all of you for our webinar today, How BJC HealthCare Created a Virtual CBO While Integrating Predictive Analytics and Technology to Improve Performance. And we're thrilled to have Tracy Berry, the Vice President of Revenue Cycle from BJC HealthCare. BJC is a nonprofit healthcare organization with 12 hospitals providing services in the Greater St. Louis, Southern Illinois, and mid-Missouri regions.
Good morning, everyone. Let me tell you just a little bit. Brian and Steve already mentioned that BJC is a big and complicated place. It's wonderful, but it's complicated. The picture you see there is a picture of Barnes Jewish Hospital and St. Louis Children's Hospital that are our two big academic centers. But in addition to those, we've got kind of everything from a small rural community access, lots of community hospitals, and then our big academics. So it's a big place and a lot of variety. And as they said, about $4 billion in revenue. So you can kind of get a feel for us. Just to kind of give you a sense, I joined BJC late in 2010. And kind of the state of play at that time is that we had a very, I usually describe us as sort of independently owned and operated revenue cycles. So at our different hospitals, we had 3 different patient accounting systems, and even where two hospitals might have used the same system, they had configured them independently and different. So they were, even though they were 3 different systems, it felt more like 11 different systems. And there hadn't been a lot of standardization in terms of process or some of our policies. There was some sharing, but again, it was a very kind of independent kind of operation. And so we were also looking at that time to start the planning to implement one patient accounting system. We were moving to Saurian, and we were looking for opportunities to make some improvement to start our journey into kind of a more central operation. And we thought that self-pay was an area that was ripe for opportunity. It was an area that we could do in advance of our Saurian implementations, and it gave us candidly some practice at starting to standardize. So we had many different business offices, and in fact we had 9 different self-pay vendors. We had many different strategies. Some hospitals outsourced on day 1, some outsourced not at all, some went at day 60. So we had lots of different kind of operating models. We were paying surprisingly varied rates for those services because we didn't take advantage of our size and scale. So each hospital was negotiating rates locally, and so we were overpaying candidly given the size of our organization. Again, because we did this independently, we didn't have standardization, and we didn't have any way to really, we had all these different vendors, but it was very difficult to just look at that performance and say, gosh, these 2 or 3 are the best. We were relying on the vendor reporting and data, so we were probably looking at apples to oranges kinds of comparisons. So we didn't have a good feel for performance. We were dealing, like everyone, with increasing bad debt and needing to ensure our community benefit. As you would imagine, with all these different systems and vendors, reconciliation was a challenge. So lots going on, and we were, again, and all this was sort of in the backdrop of we were thinking about moving to, or not thinking about, we were starting the planning to move to a single patient accounting platform. So that was the state of play back in kind of early 2011, I'd say. If we go to the next slide. So what we did, like I said, is that we were looking for some opportunities to start our consolidation and standardization, but at the time we had, again, 3 different patient accounting systems, and we were located in all kinds of, I think we had probably 11 different locations at that point. So we were looking to create really a virtual self-pay CBO. And we started with, we launched a vendor RFP. We really looked at what was the, how did we want to organize, what was the operating model, and we decided that we wanted to outsource all of our early out at day 1 and use and really consolidate our vendors. So kind of at the same time we were running this RFP process to select our early out bad debt. We also at the time didn't have any secondary bad debt vendors, so we were really, reconstructing that whole operating model. And so I think Conance and the agency manager platform really kind of pushed us and helped us create this virtual CBO. So what we were able to do then is use one platform. So it was really helpful to me as I was looking at 3 different patient accounting systems configured 9 different ways, and knowing that we were going to add a new patient accounting system with Sorian, that I could have a vendor that sat between me and my selected new partners and could manage the movement of accounts and the business rules. Also, implementing this helped us to really pushed us to get the discipline to standardize our processes, our workflow. So it made us start to really think like a system. We had to say, what's the right workflow? What are the right business rules of how long an account should stay in with one agency? So we really, kind of went through all that thinking. And what was really helpful partnering with Conance is that really gave us the discipline to, kind of force us as we're implementing the system to answer all those questions and make decisions about workflow and business processes. So we were, the things that we get as a result of this is now an ability to have much more visibility into our partners' performance. We knew that we were able to do really an apples-to-apples comparison. So now if I was comparing one vendor to another, I knew that I was looking at the data in the same way. We had standard reports. We'll share some of those, but with a lot of detail on that performance. Through all this, we also implemented a presumptive charity screening process, and we were very, as I think everyone is, very focused on making sure any accounts that rolled into bad debt or went to collections were the right accounts. So we're really trying to figure out, what kind of divide accounts from those that won't pay from those that can't pay, right? And so we have a very robust financial assistance program. We work very closely with our patients that are in need for them to apply for financial assistance. But as we all know, there's a lot of patients that may be in need, but they don't apply for assistance for a variety of reasons. Concerns about literacy, it's maybe culturally not comfortable for them. There's all kinds of reasons that our patients don't participate in our financial assistance program. So we wanted to create a safety net that once we finished that early out process, that we would screen for presumptive charity before sending anyone on to bad debt or to collections. And so that's what we really valued about that, the PARO screening process, is that after we went through that early out process, we sent statements, made phone calls, did our best effort to collect, then we were going to identify those that would qualify for presumptive charity so that we weren't sending people to collections that shouldn't be there. So that's been a real benefit of our program. And then again, through all these business rules, we were able to improve that communication between us and our vendors and make sure that we were following our rules as we wanted to. And then kind of just as an aside, as we've been moving through our Sorian implementations, we actually we're using an outside vendor to help work down the legacy AR in our old systems. And so we run that placement goes through our agency manager as well. So hopefully that gives you a feel for how we're using the system and some of those, kind of how we've organized it. If we go to the next slide, since we're most of us finance revenue cycle people, we always like the bottom line. So getting to the benefits, we have seen a big financial improvement in this overall strategy. Now, and I will say our $9.6 million of increased collections, this is all I'd say a comprehensive program, right? We changed our vendors, we consolidated vendors to improve performance and give them more scale. We implemented this technology, we changed our workflow, our business rules. All those things come together to achieve these savings. So it's kind of a comprehensive approach. We also lowered our commission rates, which you would expect when we renegotiated both our early out bad debt and secondary bad debt vendors. By giving them scale, they were able to give us better pricing than when we had things so piecemeal. So you can see there's been a real benefit to our, again, our overall program. There's probably additional opportunity, I would say, that we haven't realized yet, and we're using this platform, the data and information that we get, to continue to refine our program. So we may do things like looking at, does one vendor have a sweet spot in a particular type of account or a balance range, and maybe we want to push more of those accounts to one vendor. Do we want to maybe keep some things in-house for a period of time before we send out? All those kinds of things. We now have the data to kind of evaluate those opportunities and continue to make adjustments in our program. So I guess what I'd say is we're probably not done seeing benefits to the program. We're really using this data, this technology, to manage and improve our performance. So again, this is so much about understanding this business better, and I think, many years ago, as an industry, we weren't looking as closely at our self-pay. It wasn't as big a, we didn't have as much of it, and we could kind of focus our efforts on the other payers. But so I think some of our reporting hadn't sort of kept up with this changing environment that Steve discussed. So what we have with this platform now is that we can do a much better job understanding our performance. We can understand the performance of our vendors and compare them to each other. We can even compare ourselves to others that are using the platform in a blinded way, of course, but we can get some insight to how our vendors might compare to others that we're not using. The big thing for me is that using this platform, by building in the business rules, we're able to ensure that our vendors are operating the way we want to. And I would say our vendors also, this is good for them because they want to make sure that they are following our business rules, our expectations. And so by using this platform, that, we're really, building those rules in terms of, whether it's expectations about payment plans, what the duration and size of payment plans, at what point do we recall accounts if there's been no activity. All that stuff is built in, and so I think our vendors know that they're meeting our expectations, and we know that they are. So it really, and I think at BJC, because we had this kind of history of very, different operating models across our hospitals, this really provided that discipline to develop those standard processes. And then it really supports our continuous improvement activities as we use this data to understand our performance, our vendors' performance. We can continue to make adjustments to ensure that we're, continuing to improve our processes. Now, the one thing I will, yeah.
Tracy, I was going to say, before you leave this slide, can you talk about, because you had 11 business offices for a while and folks distributor on your side. Can you talk a little bit about the accountability that this brought to your team in terms of how they're going to respond to your vendor partners? So not just vendors complying, but some of the internal work queuing and some of that stuff.
Yeah, so we had, and again, in that kind of independently owned and operated era, we had folks in each of our locations that were managing the vendors that, were doing work for them. And so by implementing agency manager, we consolidated, and again, at first it was virtual because we were in different locations, but those individuals that were working with the vendors came together on one team, so they were all working with one leadership group. And then as we, built these business rules, so there would be rules about at what point do we at BJC have to approve some sort of an exception. And so the work queues in the system, again, those work queues drive work to both the vendor and to us at BJC, and that's how we manage that communication back and forth. Steve, is there anything you would add to that from your perspective?
No, I think it's important for one of the themes that I always am struck by is how important it is for the providers to be responsive to the vendors as much as it is for vendors to be responsive to providers. So this bilateral accountability is always interesting idea.
I think it really supports that partnership, and that's, again, these are, we're a big place. These vendors are doing a lot of work on our behalf, have a huge impact on our patient satisfaction. So that partnership, that working together and meeting each other's expectations, I think is really important. And I think I would add to that, which is even in this outsourced environment where we have these very strong vendor partners working for us, it takes time and effort for us to manage and partner with them. So even though, we've outsourced the bulk of this work and we're using this, this technology to help with this workflow and communication, we still have to provide, resources and effort. And I suppose maybe it changes a little bit of the focus of the work, but that, that work, we still at BJC own, a fair amount of this work in partnership with our vendors. So with that, let me go to the next slide. And I tell you, I have a report sitting here on my desk which just has so much good data about our work, our vendors, how they compare to one another, and we can, Conus can slice and dice, by our performance by balance size, by type, by, we certainly get kind of overall reporting where we can compare one vendor to the other, which in our case are too early out. Our two vendors compare very nicely to each other. One's not wildly better than the other, but when you start digging in a little deeper, looking at the type of accounts, balance after versus self-pay or balance size, we do see some differences in how they perform. And so the nice thing about this is that we have very good kind of apples-to-apples comparison of our vendor partners. If you go to the next slide, we also get some view of how other vendors that are supporting other hospitals on the platform. Of course, it's all blinded, but we can look at our collection rates. And again, I would suggest that this is probably not a perfect comparison because you don't always know exactly maybe age of placement and some of those things. But this is the best data I've had that tells me kind of how my vendors are, their collection rates are compared to others in the industry. And again, we can look at this in different ways by all balances or balance size and the like. If we go to the next slide, then when we talked about that kind of process standardization accountability, we can start looking at what is the work effort. So it's important to us, obviously, that our patients are getting the right number of statements, that they're getting that final notice, that, all of that sort of stuff, that we can monitor the actual work effort that they're putting into the account. And what this slide shows you is the outbound calls by each of the agencies. And you can see there's a pretty big difference between the two agencies. And so, I mean, I think it's interesting to kind of contemplate that. Like I said, overall, their collection rates are not that different. They're pretty close to each other. But what you can see is their approaches are quite different. And so we've used this kind of data to look at, when calls are launched, how long. So for us on our balance after insurance, for example, we really don't want a lot of calls made in those early that first month or so, right? Most patients with a residual balance after insurance will pay from a statement. They don't really want to be bothered. In fact, sometimes they feel like if someone's calling them, they're being hounded. So it's, kind of finding that sweet spot of when calls should be launched, how many calls. So we can, this is just kind of gives you a little taste for it, but we can get a lot of information about how our vendors, their workload and when their, kind of numbers of letters sent and calls made and the like. On the next slide, then, I think we've suffered like many, I think in the, prior, that, keeping those accounts moving can be a challenge. So when a payment plan is broken, does that account then move to the next place? So we really want to monitor accounts that are on a payment plan, but payments aren't being made. And so what you can see over time in this data is the number of accounts that were on a payment plan but didn't have a payment in the last 60 days. And you can see that we really focused on that with our partners to say, hey, if they're on a payment plan and a payment's not being made, you've got to do something. You've got to move that on so that that those accounts just aren't sitting there getting stale. So this is just another way that we can kind of help monitor those processes. Moving to the next slide, then I talked a bit about the presumptive charity, and I'm really high on this. I think it's good for us and good for our patients. Again, in a more perfect world, everyone would participate actively in our financial assistance program, but that's not always the case. And so we also wanted to be very careful that when we sent someone to collections or to bad debt, that they were patients that had the ability to pay. And so we implemented, at our place at least, we screen for presumptive charity in between early out and bad debt. And so then at that point, and our financial assistance policy, we have a sliding scale, so we mirror that in presumptive charity where the accounts screen, and then we do a sliding scale adjustment. And we can look at this overall in terms of the dollars and the accounts qualified. We also can look at it by hospital. So we have a very robust reporting on that. Moving to the next slide, then I've covered much of this, but again, what's really helped us is really the kind of the dialogue that we have with our vendors, that this information and reporting gives us, to have that really good discussion, and then accountability. And that's really, as Steve pointed out earlier, accountability for us to our vendors and our vendors to us. So again, that partnership. So we have faster and easier access to reports, really very comprehensive reporting package that gives us those comparisons, whether it's overall collection rates, aging, activity, some of those examples I gave you. Again, that accountability I discussed with us and our partners. And I think this gives us very sort of sound and rational information to discuss with in our partnership. So we're not working on just anecdotes or sort of my feeling that you're doing a good or bad job. It gives us very specific data to work from. And like I've discussed, for us a real improvement was that standardization across all of our hospitals. This was part of our journey to more consistent operations. And then the workflow, all those, the workflow that we built in there to manage the information back and forth between us. We're using work queues and so forth to communicate back and forth between our staff and the vendor staff. And we know, well, then we can see, is a work queue been answered, and that can be, we have a backlog, it would highlight a backlog on our side or the vendor side if we're not working those work queues as we should. So as you might guess, we've learned a lot of lessons in this process. And again, just kind of keeping in mind, we started this, I think, back in, it was back in 2011 that we started, and we were, at that point at BJC, again, we were kind of starting a broader journey of consolidation and standardization. And so I'd say the first thing is planning matters, and we certainly did a lot of planning, and we partnered very closely with Conance and our IT folks and our vendor partners. But this was a pretty big undertaking, as you would guess, with the differences in all of our IT systems, moving to this virtual CBO. And so we probably were a little aggressive in our rollout schedule. And so I would just encourage you, if you're looking at something like this, is to really think about not only the technology, but your culture, what else is happening at your organization, and set kind of an appropriate pacing and sequencing. The business rules, one of the things I really appreciated was the discipline that this brought to us to create those business rules and decision rights. And so I think we've been adjusting these over time. So we probably set some of our our approval levels a little too low or too high, depending on how you think about that. So we ended up in some cases just being inundated in our work queues of approving different things, and so we thought, well, why are we approving that? We need to give our vendor that leeway to to make decisions, and so we've had to adjust over time some of those kind of the decision rights, if you will, and in a balanced way, both to balance that relationship, but our individual workload, because every time you ask your vendors to, that they have to ask for an exception for something, whether it be a payment plan or extending an account in early out, then they've got to ask, we've got to respond, and that drives us, that drives work. So you have to kind of set that up with kind of your workload in mind. I mentioned earlier that just because you have a vendor management tool doesn't mean that you don't manage your vendors anymore, or that it eliminates work. You just do it different and in a more effective way, I would suggest. It's really important, obviously, to engage your vendors. If you think about this three-legged stool between Conants, the hospital or hospital system, and your vendors, everybody plays, everybody has to work closely together and has to be engaged. So if you're contemplating some sort of vendor management tool, you have to make sure that your vendors are willing and will participate actively in that. And if they won't or can't, then you're probably going to need to think about a different vendor partner. And staff training, I mean, we've done a lot of staff training. We continue to train. We continue to kind of learn and refine our program. So we have to continue, making sure that our staff is, understanding the work queues and how to work with them and how to partner with the vendors. So that training that dialogue ends up being kind of ongoing.